What did they say, New York? All right, we are live here on LinkedIn and YouTube with Eric Weber, where we're going to talk about data careers. And I will be honest, we don't have questions or a layout or an agenda prepared. We're literally here to talk about data careers and answer questions from the audience. So if you've got questions, Eric's got answers. So Eric.
Eric has. This is, I come on here to be like, let's go back and forth, and then Kate's just gonna like mute herself and be like, have fun for the next hour. It'll be great.
I can just leave, yes. So Eric, you had a really good question for the audience. Go for it.
All right. Without intending to, whenever someone leads with this, be careful. Without intending to offend any specific locations on planet Earth, what's the most boring location or place that you've ever visited? Because, okay, guys, let's be real. I grew up in Minnesota. There are a lot of boring places in Minnesota. So, I have, people could say anywhere in flyover country in the United States, and, I wouldn't be offended by that. So, we'll see what comes in. I'm really interested. Kate's really fearful that someone's going to say New York.
No, I hope not. It can't be boring. New York can't be boring.
New York, is not boring, I guess. It's definitely a lot of awesome things and others, but not boring.
All right. So if you're tuning in now, Eric's question was, what was the most boring place you've ever visited? I actually don't have one. I think anywhere I go, I think if you're a boring person, Eric, anywhere you go, you'll be bored.
Wow.
But for me personally.
Oh no! See, now we're doing personal.
Yes, I actually have fun wherever I go. So we've got a couple people chiming in, just saying hello for now. Hi, Elizabeth, Abhishek. We've got Tawar. We've got Joseph. All right, we're looking for boring places, guys. I don't know why you want boring places, Eric. I mean, are you looking to be bored? It's an odd question.
I'm creating a list of places not to visit, so then I'll just start including other things. So, but while we're thinking about that particular question, today.
Wait, Delwar says she agrees with me, so just letting you know, if you're a boring person, you'll be bored anywhere.
So the message that's going to come out of this is that I'm a boring person, is what the general, not a good thing. This is not the brand I want to create, but Kate's the exciting one. I'm the boring one. But I guess when we get on the same, I guess it'll be interesting working together on this. Looks like a lot of people are joining. Awesome.
Yes, we've got Victor saying Erie, Pennsylvania. All right.
See, the problem with me asking that question is
I know. I was just going to say people are telling you where they're going.
This was a disastrous question. We should just go back. We should just ask the same question every time. What is the weirdest food that you've ever eaten? Because that's just more innocent than anything else.
Oh my God. Yes. Well, yeah, exactly. I blame you for the terrible questions. So we're going to just say hi to a few people. We got Anthony, we got Andrew. We do have a question already, if you're ready, Eric.
I am ready.
You're ready. Okay. So how to do image augmentation in a CFIR data set? I have seen the same blog, but I'm feeling overwhelmed by seeing these blogs. So I have no clue.
I'm gonna think that that's probably so my understanding of that data set is that I think it's just the object recognition. It's like an object recognition data set. But as far as augmentation, one, I think this is probably gonna I think this is a more specific question for a post, because this is such a I think in general it's super, super detailed relative to data careers. So I'm going to take that and I'll think more about it. But I think I want to keep it high level before we start diving into specific details.
So Anand, this is a question you can ask Eric privately, and he will spend half a day explaining it. That's what it sounds like.
Half a day. It might take me more than that. That's awesome.
Yeshwan's saying he's bored at museums whenever he visits any new cities and towns, so he makes sure to skip those.
I'm never asking a question again, Kate. You're always just going to be the ones. So
you did a great job last time. So
maybe it should be what's the most boring museum you've ever visited? I've gone to ones that there are some in the Midwest that are yarn museums. Like I feel like that. Okay, but there are people who love yarn. So like, let's be
I know,
real.
but I mean, what does that say about you? You made the decision to go to a yarn museum. What did you think was going to happen? Like yarn being thrown at you, or I don't even know what you.
For where my parents forced me to go as a child.
Okay, got it.
They were
That makes
operating the vehicle. They're like, we're going to see this. I was like, okay. Awesome.
So we're gonna try to take as many questions as we can. So we're gonna do like rapid fire, which I like because I see a couple more questions coming in now. So question here for Puneet saying, confused about Power BI and Tableau. What should I begin with?
I'm going to let Kate kick that one. This is like right in your wheelhouse in fact, there was an important poll you released very recently, right? Where you talked about people's preferences.
Yes, I actually did. Yeah, I took a survey of over 1,000 people. It took a little bit over a week, probably 8 days or so total to get over 1,000 responses, which I was actually impressed with because people really wanted to take that survey. But I essentially asked what data visualization tool you'd like to see a course on, and there was a list of 12. And Power BI and Tableau, well, Tableau was number one, Power BI ended up being number two in terms of popularity. But I say you learn whatever you want to learn, Puneet, because they're so similar that if you learn one, it's very easy to transfer that knowledge to another. I think it depends if you're working for a corporation and they have one of the tools versus the other. I'd go with whatever the corporation is using. But if you're not currently employed, just pick one. Tableau Public is free. I know Power BI has a free version as well, so I don't think cost is going to play into this unless you're using private data. So if you're just playing around, either one works. But Eric, anything you want to add on that one?
I think you made a good point that it's often going to be company dependent. So if you think about the results of Power BI and the results of Tableau, because they're competitors with each other, they tend to keep pace with each other when it comes to features, when it comes to things that are available. Of course, the actual back end and how they work is a little bit different. But if you're looking to focus on data visualization, which is why I think you're asking this question, focus on like the principles of data visualization and then figure out how to make the tool do the work you need it to do. I don't think like you're going to go into a company and they're going to be like, we have licenses for Power BI or we have licenses for Tableau. And guess what? That's what you get to use. So what's important at that point is that you understand what you're trying to do with the data visualization and why you're building it, what you're trying to show the end user, because the mechanics in Power BI and Tableau are both this way. They're designed to make it relatively, I shouldn't say easy, but more straightforward to get up to speed. So it's more important that you understand what you're trying to do. What are you trying to visualize? And of course, the tools are just going to just grow in breadth over time. Like it's Power BI and Tableau now, but like there will be competitors.
there are competitors, right? I mean, there's Google Data Studio, there's ClickSense, Chario, Data Wrapper. There's so many.
That's not my. See, I can't just like name them off like Kate can. Like I'm just.
Oh, but even R and Python, right? I mean, you can visualize data in those in that as well.
Yeah.
So there's just so many possible methods of visualizing data. And I could talk about this all day, but I'm gonna have to stop myself so we can move on to another question. So, oh, by the way, before I go to more questions, I'm just excited. My niece is here. She's joined the LinkedIn Live. She hasn't asked a question yet, so no pressure. But whenever you're ready, ask us a question. She's getting into data career, probably in the data visualization space. So just calling her out here. All right. Brian Camp, what is your advice for someone who just got a BA, BS in mathematics with some R Python programming experience? How does he get into data science?
I think this is a pretty common question, so I hope we can dig a bit into it. Because the general question I'm hearing here is, I have a degree in something that is considered very relevant to the data science space. I have some programming experience, but what do I do with it, right? So this question, I think it really shows people's different experience. Like, you may get different responses depending on who you talk to. So I'm going to try to speak in general about not just what I think, but also like what I think could be true from multiple people's opinions. Generally, the most important thing here is that you start producing something practical with it. So as you learn R and Python, it's fine to learn individual skill sets or learn about packages. but it's really important that you consider, what are you producing? What are you trying to build? What data sets are you using to do that? So good examples to consider are data sets that may not be have been used like 10 million times already. So if you look at data sets that show up all the time, like the Titanic data set or things like that, the Iris data set, all of these things. There are a lot, like Google data set search. I think that's, I don't know the specific name of it, but there are tons of data sets out there. It's important that as you do your learning in these languages, that you start thinking about, how do you build up something for yourself, right? What does a personal project look like? And this is a really common question too. It's like, what I typically see that people are asking, they're like, there's a gap between what I have right now and what I need to get into a position. Typically that gap is closed with experience. Okay. And experience doesn't just mean that like you have to be in a formal position, but you have to have done work in some capacity. And that could be on a project, that could be on like, there are a bunch of things that are available now that are like more mentorship type opportunities. Sort of, I do think there'll be much more robust internship models that result from having a distributed workforce. But the idea here is you produce something that has a deliverable with it. And the deliverable is not just about the technical component, right? It's not just about, hey, here's how fancy of a dashboard I built, or here's how good of a model that I produced. In some way, it also has to be about, you're able to tell a story around that data. You're able to help the end user hone in on what matters, right? If you run, for example, if you run a model or something and it tells you which variables are important, speak to why that matters, right? Like, why would I care what variables are important? What actions could this produce? It's really about getting that in between, like, project internship type of experience. And that is the key to sort of leveraging your degree and the programming experience into something that companies are going to notice.
Yeah, I mean, so you mentioned a lot of great points. I think building a portfolio of those projects is important. And I guess, would you keep that in GitHub, or is there another location where you can showcase your work to potential hiring managers?
I mean, I think GitHub is a pretty good default just for a repo for yourself.
Yeah.
But also think about the ways in which you can potentially share things in social channels. So particularly in the data space, I would tend to believe that most people who are in this space and who are active in social media typically they may be active on more, but they either are using Twitter or they're using LinkedIn. I don't, and I think it depends on the specific community, but in general, if you like, and I get it's uncomfortable, like social media still is like a little bit uncomfortable for me too. But try to think about creating a social presence for yourself where you share things, follow other people, interact with them. I think it's interesting how many people end up in roles and where the introduction to the person doing that hiring or the person that got them into that role was literally someone they connected with in social media, and they started sharing things and commenting on each other's work. Like, that's going to be the norm for a long time. It's not just going to be you're clearly right now, and if you're in the US, you're not going to run into somebody in a coffee shop. If you do, they'll hopefully have a mask on, and they will also, like, just think about the ways that you can connect. Social media is huge. But try to be diligent about that. Don't just say like, okay, I'm going to post everything that I do. Try to create, like, when someone views your profile on Twitter or on LinkedIn or on GitHub, what do you want them to see first? Just like when you post something, like the first couple of lines matter a lot. The same idea is, like, if you have one project and you wanted people to see that, how would you get it in front of them? Because it's unlikely that they're going to look through like an entire library of work that you've done unless they're getting like really deep into your profile. But what do you want them to, like, what do you want them to see when they look at your profile? And I think that is something that's really important to consider. Like, very valuable real estate. A good thing would be an example, like a LinkedIn headline is very important, because that's, for a lot of people, that's what they will see or what will bring them in. Twitter, similar, right? You have a little bio that you can share about yourself. GitHub, different things, but you should say who you are, like why people would be interested in what you're doing. It matters a lot. And I know it sounds weird, and I know that's like, you're like, well, this is confirmation bias. You're talking about the importance of social media, but like, it's not just me and it's not just Kate. Like, this happens all over the field, that people get their introductions and connections to people in a virtual way before they ever meet in person.
Yeah, absolutely. So some comments on this. I think if people are looking for other ways to get a role in data science, there's a statistic I learned yesterday, and it was around informational interviews, right? So there's, I don't know who did this research or how accurate the statistic is, but what's been thrown around there is if you hold 20 very high quality information interviews with either people from the potential companies you want to work with or people who are well connected in the industry, chances are you're going to get a job as a result of those 20 informational interviews. Obviously, they have to be done right? You can't just come in there and use the person or make them feel like they're being used. It has to be very strategic, and they have to think they're getting some sort of value in return. But if anyone's thinking out there, how do I get a job? Applications are going into a black box and you're never hearing back. This is just one more thing you can try if you haven't tried it already. Those information interviews. That's actually how I got started in data science. Just in the realm of data science, I was curious about the role 6-7 years ago, and I started reaching out to people, just random people on LinkedIn, asking if I could have 15 to 20 minutes of their time just to ask them, how did you get started? What was your journey? And that actually resulted in my writing the Journey to Data Scientist book. That was my first book because I wanted to summarize that and make other people might be interested. And those individuals, there are over 20 of them, came from all over the place. It didn't land me a job, but that's not what I was looking for. I just wanted to learn more about the space, but I still am on great terms with all those people. So you build that relationship. All right, we've got a lot of questions. How do I even pick one? This is okay. Let's see.
Random question generator.
Random question generator.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go with Manuel. So it's starting at the beginning. All right, what's the learning path for someone who wants to move to a data career? So this is even before they're graduating.
So I feel like we could have a whole very extended discussion about this.
Yeah, 1 minute, go.
So when you're thinking about I think a lot of the discussions that you see happen in social media and on LinkedIn, all of these places, they often are about the path itself, but there is less discussion about the goal, like where are you trying to go? Mm-hmm. So I also want that to be an important focus, and that what data careers can look like a lot of different things, right? There can be, I think we get very attuned to when people hear about this, they see flashy salaries for AI researchers, and they're like, all right, that's going to be me. And then they start to figure out the value in data is an entire spectrum. So there's a more traditional analyst role, which I would argue is so valuable to so many companies at this point that they're realizing that they didn't hire enough analysts. They've hired so many data scientists and figured out that, well, the actual work around data is generally in the analytics space and doing more traditional product metrics and things like that. Data science, you can sort of think about more traditional machine learning, more heavily into applied statistics. That's where you might be doing something like experimentation. More of an engineering perspective would be from data engineering, you're actually building the fundamental pipelines that get data in front of the right stakeholders, right? So if data scientists want to do their work and have it be reasonably easy, I can guarantee that data engineering is the foundation of doing that. It's so critical. And I know we don't talk about data engineering enough. I am not a data engineer, and I want to make that.
Get Andreas Kretz up in here.
Yes, we need to. Can we phone a friend? Is this how this works? Can we please?
We can. Yeah, sure. If you want to have him pop in, I'm sure he won't mind.
Andreas, come on, show up. But the point of illustrating this, like there's a lot of niche areas when it comes to like data careers, but you have to decide what is it that you maybe enjoy doing. And if you don't know, that's also okay, right? Like what that means is that you need to explore different types of projects, different types of courses. Like, are you more into visualization, doing, more traditional analytics where you're doing analysis of the data set and trying to provide insights from that data set itself? Are you interested in like really building more full grade models that help companies make decisions like in production? Are you like, there's so much in this space that part of what's important is to not make up, I would actually encourage you not to make your mind up too early and too quickly. Because what I've seen happen is a lot of people see like data science and then they're like, I want to be a data scientist. And then everything from that is like a tunnel view. Like if it doesn't say data science, you don't listen. But it's more about thinking about what the data career involves. The other thing that is like from a learning path perspective, I think this can be challenging and something that I've actively been thinking about. The important part is there probably are not really super well-defined learning paths at this point. That's actually one of the missing things in this market is, okay, I want to get there, but how do I get there? And then we cobble together advice through different people's posts about like, do this or do this or do that. I've even thought about this around SQL, for example, right? Like there's no really well-defined learning path for like how to get to like intermediate proficiency. It just doesn't exist. There's like 200 different things that exist. They're somewhat coherent, but like they don't necessarily fit together. So the best thing you can do when you're like thinking about your path is to think about it in small steps. Like try some things out. Also be willing to also know when you've taken a misstep or something that you don't think is as valuable. You're like, okay, well, I want to do this. And then a month later, you figure out that's not quite what you wanted to do. Great. That's not a bad thing. The last thing I want you to do is end up in a space or a career that is not motivating to you. Because if it's not motivating to you, like this work is not easy. That's the other thing that I want to like emphasize is like working in the data space. Like there's a lot of technical challenges, a lot of human challenges. And so if you're starting out being like, well, I just want to have a good salary and I want to also do this, like understand that the motivation that you have is really going to need to come from the work as well. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Kate, but.
Yeah, I mean, this brings me back to when I was graduating college. I was a finance degree, and I remember going to those career fairs back in the day when you can actually see people and shake hands, and they all had their tables. Yeah, you bring your little resume that's got like internships and not much else on there. And you're dressed up, you're feeling awkward, and they're like, "So what do you want to do?" And I'm like, "Finance." And now to me, it sounds so dumb, right? Okay, finance, okay. There are like a million things you could do in finance. What do you want to do? And not having that clear, I know you said not to commit to anything, but I think having at least some sort of inkling of what you want to do, right? Because it's so broad and it could just be surrounding a couple of areas that that you're interested in. Like if you hate coding, then, it's probably not going to be what you're going to tell them you want to do. But having that idea, I think is just very important. And there's a relevant question, a related question here to motivation that you touched on from Jatin, saying that every time he starts a book or a course to get more understanding, he loses motivation midway. So he's asking, what do you recommend to keep the enthusiasm high and complete what is started? So he's already a data professional with good SQL and Python knowledge. It's just the data science concepts that he needs to get a good grip on.
So I have two perspectives on this. The first one is it's not always bad if you don't finish a course. Like I don't want there to be like this. So when you start a course, you start it for different reasons. One is that it piqued your interest. Yeah. You wanted to learn something and you got the majority of what you wanted to learn pretty early on in the course. And then you start to see like diminishing returns with your time. throughout that course, it's not necessarily a bad thing to not finish it. This doesn't mean that I'm encouraging you to like bail on every course, but also understand your time is super valuable. And you figure out that once you're in this course and you're like, okay, I think what I've gotten what I can get out of this, then that can be okay. Especially if you're already in a career, you're already in a role, like your time is pretty compressed and you need to be very careful with it. But if you are looking for like motivation, a course typically is not going to be the motivational part in and of itself. You're taking it for a reason. So
Yeah, I was just gonna say you signed up for a reason.
signed up
Maybe
for a reason.
document why you signed up. What were your intentions? I think a lot of us sign up for courses. I actually posted about this last week. There were so many thoughts on this topic. My question was, why do we sign up for courses? And I think over 90% of us don't actually finish the courses. And I think the same thing applies to books. And I'm guilty of it myself. I've signed up for amazing courses, right? Like they're really good. And the reason I signed up was because I wanted to know that content. And I think when we're clicking that enroll button in our mind, we're like, oh, we're going to be geniuses. We're going to take all this knowledge, download it into our mind. We're going to do it 3 hours a day for the next 10 days and we'll be done, right? And then something happens. We don't follow through for the most part. We're like, okay, we have great intentions, and then either work comes up or things come up or we make our own little excuses as to why we couldn't do it. And I think, it's also psychological. You made a good point, right? You don't have to finish everything that you start, because if you've already gotten what you needed from it, then you're probably good to go on and learn other concepts. But it looks like Jatin is trying to finish the stuff that he signed up for. So in terms of motivation, you have to think of the end goal, right? Why are you taking this course? What is it going to lead to? Is it a better job? Is it just knowing how to do your current job in a more effective way? So I think it's all intrinsic. It's hard to motivate yourself.
Motivation is really challenging. Like one, like you can wake up one morning and be like, I'm going to take on the world. And then by 11 a.m. you're like, that was nice when I thought that. But what's really important here is if you want to create a space to motivate yourself, a couple of things. Think about what the outcome is that you want, right? Before you start the course, before you're like, before you dive into it, what is something, do you want to add a certificate about this to your LinkedIn profile? Do you want to share this publicly? If you put social pressure on yourself to finish something, it often is a good lever to continue. Like, let's say that you commit to posting something every few days about what you're learning in this course, and you're like, I'm going to keep doing this until it's done. Like, if you apply social pressure to yourself and you like make it public, it's often a very good incentive to keep you moving, even if you're like, honestly, there are days where I'm like, I don't want to post anything today. I'm in a bad mood. Like, I don't want to do this. But I kind of have created this space where I'm like, I am committing to sharing something useful on a daily basis. And like, you create that pressure, whether it's a course or whatever it may be. I think if you create that sort of contract with yourself and also make it somewhat public, like, I'm going to do this, then all of a sudden it's less about, okay, do I have to do this today? It's more like, okay, I made this commitment.
I'm doing this today.
I'm doing this today. And
it's not a question anymore.
Like, something that I did when I first started taking courses. So like I started taking Coursera courses in like 2013, 2014. At the time I had basically like in GitHub, and I don't have it there anymore because I had to change my GitHub, but I had a public list of courses and the date I started them and the date that I intended to finish them.
Okay.
And it was like, and I kept doing it. I was like, this is public. I put something on paper. There's something that I need to get done. And this is also, so whatever it takes, I do think applying that social pressure and making a commitment to more than just you in your head can be very good. Just
I've done something very similar, actually, right when COVID was hitting the US pretty hard and all the conferences were starting to get canceled. I was like, oh no, I miss conferences. So what I did was I put together a mini conference for myself where I took 8 different courses and decided I'm going to take about 25 minutes of each of those courses. I had this Google sheet And for the first few days, it went really, really well. And then after that, work happened, life happened, and again, lost the motivation. But I think making it public is so important. It doesn't work for everybody. First of all, not everyone's a public person. They don't feel comfortable doing it. But if you are comfortable with that, that accountability is really good.
Yeah.
All right, let's see. We have a great question here from Josh Richmond. So what do you think about a data team using Agile methodology? So pointing tickets, working in sprints. Well, it can help with planning and communication. I found that data projects often take longer than initially anticipated because of data quality or insights that arise along the way.
Yeah. There's a lot of this question, and it's not just applicable to those who are currently in positions, but when we talk about Agile methodology, typically like a sprint would be considered, it mostly is like, if you're in a company, it typically is something that engineering used first. They're basically in a 2-week sprint to create chunks of work where they are doing like sectioned types of deliverables. This is how my team at Yelp works. We work in 2-week sprints. Basically, the idea being that you are focusing on short delivery cycles so you can show stakeholders what has changed, what has progressed in the last 2 weeks, that you can get their buy-in. The opposing, like maybe older view would be that you would work on something for 3 months and then deliver it, and then you only get feedback then. Agile methodology, I think, is much more applicable, whether you use the formal 2-week thing or not. The focus is that you are trying to involve stakeholders early and get feedback frequently. So I think it's a really good principle, whether it's 2 weeks or 1 week, that's fine. But I do think it's incredibly important for data.
Yeah.
The idea in data, or one of the challenges, like Josh mentioned, is that sometimes our estimates for how long things will take may be a little bit off, and I understand that, but the most important thing is that you open these communication lines about what's happening. And so that principle to me of Agile is the most applicable, is like, you need to involve stakeholders early and often and show them what's happening, get their feedback, because as requirements change or as challenges come up, you also need to share those things with them.
Yeah.
And be like, this is what I'm running into. And just because you don't deliver what you originally said would take 2 weeks, like, one, let your leader worry about that. Like, that's what I'm on the hook.
You're the leader.
Yeah, I am on the hook for that every day. Like, but that's the whether you met the deadline is something that should be more of their conversation. Like, okay, you should be able to explain why you're able to or not able to, like, and what led to these changes. But it's also okay to offload some of that, like, okay, expectations and like alignment to a leader. Like, that's a lot of my role now in like running sprint cycles and like where we're building big things for an organization, is I have to be able to and accountable to explain why things are happening or why they're not happening. But from an individual perspective, just take this away: communicate early and often, communicate challenges, and that principle of Agile is really powerful to me.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Renata had a very similar question, right, about how do you manage stakeholders' expectations. And I think you're spot on, just communicate frequently. So if you see a data quality issue pop up, you let people know right away, right? I think a lot of times we as humans want to prove to the world that we got this, we can fix the issue, and maybe we don't even have to tell anybody there was one. We'll still hit the deadline because we're going to be amazing and over deliver. But I agree, it's just so much smarter, work smarter to just let people know and be very transparent about what's happening.
It is. And people will get frustrated. This is the other thing that happens. Like, stakeholders are stakeholders. They have investments in seeing things get done in a certain time frame with a certain level of accuracy. But what I've found is, even if there is professional frustration, doesn't always, it generally 97.2% of the time precisely does not translate into like personal frustration. They understand that like there are limitations to the data that you're working with. There's only so well we can do. But the only way that you're going to get that buy-in is if you focus on transparency. Like, here's where we are, here's the challenges we're facing, here's what we're doing for you to do the best we can. That messaging goes a long way in just building trust and familiarity.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have personal experiences where for some reason I kept things to myself for a few days thinking I'm going to figure it out. And then we actually ended up, I mean, it wasn't like a huge deal if you missed this deadline. Right. It doesn't look good, right? Like you're at the next meeting and people are expecting to see something. You're like, oh, well, yeah, things happened. And, you know, obviously you can't blame yourself because it was a system error and, you know, it wasn't my fault. And I'm sure they were like, well, why didn't you just tell me what has happened? We probably could have handled it together. And this is early on in my career, but lesson learned, right? We learn
exactly
as we work. So Kim's here. So Kimberly Harrington, thank you for joining us. She's asking, when you were starting out, what was your biggest failure or barrier you had to overcome? I'm sure you didn't have any, Eric, but
barriers. What's that? No, just which one of like 500 is the main question? So
one. What'd you do yesterday? I mean,
so I'll be specific to my experience because I think it actually resonates pretty widely with a lot of people who go into data. Is I had to get out of the research mindset. I had to like break that habit. So I was from the academic world, and so I was very much in the mindset of like everything that I produce has to be like publication level quality, and it has to be perfect before I ship it. Well, those things don't work, but like that never happens, first of all. And so so the barrier for me was that I still viewed working with data as like a series of research projects where it was like I sort of fell in love with the process and the details and less about the deliverable, when it's more about produce a deliverable. Don't get so attached to the details and the tools and the models that you're using. And I still have to actively do that because I like this space a lot. So I like the science of it. But so failure wise, it was just delivering, like walking into a meeting with a PowerPoint deck and basically giving more or less like a traditional research talk. Like, this is the problem, this is how I approached it, this is the method, here were the results, here are my conclusions. Like that does not apply in a business setting. And I had to I definitely got called out for that more than once. And it's something that I've just had to change over time. Basically, people care about the conclusions. They may or may not ask about how you got there. And in fact, in most cases, they won't ask. Like in a business meeting, they want to know, like, what did you find? They trust you to be doing the work that you're being paid to do. And if they want to know details, they can always go find them. But I think that continues to be a barrier. And it's less for me now, but people that I have on my teams, whether it's engineering or product or data, like it's still something that we have to work through to be like very business focused and outcome focused.
Yeah, we've got a couple comments to that saying done is better than perfect. And Kim is saying production beats perfection. I agree. Yeah, thanks for sharing that story. I think for me, the biggest barrier was for some reason, and people might think it's crazy, but I refused to Google things early on. I was just I'll figure it out. I'll use the actual help document. I don't know why I didn't trust things like Stack Overflow. I'm like, oh, I don't know. But now, literally any question about anything, Google is the first to know I have my hand raised. So that was
that. I think it's important, like on your resume, be like, hey, I'm really good at like you have to be good at finding answers and finding information. So like I often ask in interviews, I'm like, if you don't know something, like what do you do? And if they're like, say everything but Google, I keep like waiting. And I'm waiting because I know we all have like 6 Google tabs open when we're coding. Like that's just how it is.
I think for me, it was more of a personal thing. I even remember one of my first corporate jobs ever. We had to travel to Canada, and we were at this new corporate building, and the lady in charge, she's like, "Hey, I need you to print this," and I'm like, "Oh, geez, like how do I connect?" Like it was back in the day where you had to like connect the printer to something. And I'm just like, I'm sitting there for like 10 minutes, and she's like, Kate, did you get it printed? And I'm like, no, I'm trying to figure it out. And she's like, what do you figure out? Just go around and ask people. I'm like, oh, okay, I guess I could do that. I mean, I was a lot more shy and reserved back then, but definitely a lot easier now when you can actually speak. So let's see. Yes, Kimberly, if I can't find it, I'll help you find somebody that can. Exactly.
Cool.
So, and Anthony says Google is your friend. Yeah, now I actually tell my kids. So when my kids ask me a question like, why is the sky blue? I'm like, I don't know, we'll ask Google later. Or they would just say themselves, can you ask Google this question? Because like they know I'm not going to know something. So, all right, let me scroll. Let's see. Questions. I'm just going to randomly pick things because I don't want to make people wait while I read stuff. It's fun to read them, right, Eric? You're not supposed to read questions. I'm calling you out.
Why not? I wouldn't be doing that. Maybe I was reading the questions.
It's just hard to pick. There's so many good ones. Okay, I know how you're going to feel about this. Question from Jess. This one's from YouTube. So hello, YouTube is here. It's typically mostly LinkedIn questions that come in. But how do you recommend finding a data science job that is ethical?
Okay, so there's
you approach questions. So why don't you define ethics first?
Yes. So honestly, part of the challenge here is that ethics is defined as like an individual basis. But generally speaking, I want to know that a company is trying to do things that improve people's life in some measurable way. Like, are they making something easier to do? Are they allowing someone to have more fun in their day to day? Are they like, what are like
two very, very bad things that is easier to do and more fun? So you have to be more specific.
Okay, ethics mean you're not going to hurt and end up being a net negative or hurt other people.
Okay,
so if you're building a product, and this is something like, just I'm gonna not go into specific products here because I think that is just not worth the conversation. But when it comes to ethics, when you're looking for a specific role, ask the company, the hiring manager, like, why is this company doing data science? Like, what are you trying to do? So if you think about that, that answer is often pretty revealing because it helps you understand how they view using data tells a lot about what they're trying to do as a company, what their principles are as a company.
Yeah.
Like, when you think about that question, and I know it sounds relatively simple, but it does tell you a lot. It reveals like why they're using, like, how do they view data? Are they viewing your data as something to be resold as much as they can? Or are they viewing your data as an asset they can use to create a better experience for you, right? Create a better experience to create some net positive, like something for like certainly at any company, the data that they collect could be used in multiple ways, right? This is something like, but if you think about one thing I appreciated about working at LinkedIn specifically was they were very clear publicly about how they use data. And in a lot of cases, it was to try to connect you with the right people, right? Here's who you should be following. Here's who you should connect with. Like, we think this post is relevant to you. Like, that's a good use of data. But you think about all the things that you provide to LinkedIn, there are, of course, potential negative use cases if the company decided that they wanted to use it in such a way. And so asking a question about why, like, what do they think? What data do they collect? Of course, they're not going to tell you that in an interview, but like, how do they think about responsibly using it? And if they don't have a plan and a way to explain that to you, that should be a good indicator of whether like ethical, like ethics in this space. But it's a tough question. There's, and the other thing that I want to say is like, there are a lot of incredible people that I have seen get pushback on where they work, specifically because of some news story about that company specific. And so like, the company is not the person. This is another thing, like, just because like at the end of the day, we are out here to try to have a career, make a living, do the things that we enjoy. Also understand that you can't always control exactly where that happens. Like, if you're fortunate to be in a position where you can say like, I'm going to choose the super ethical company over the one that had some bad news stories about it, like you're in a very privileged position. It's also about recognizing that people make decisions for other reasons, like they have to take care of themselves, they want to get a job. But if it comes to ethical decisions, really ask just that basic question: how do you think about ethics? And if, oh, I haven't been asked that before, we haven't ever addressed that, that's also a good indicator for you. What are your thoughts on that, Kate?
Right, and I think if you're asking that question in an interview, the interviewer will probably remember you as well, because you'll stand out, because that probably nobody else has asked that question.
You're right.
I was just wondering, how do you find out if a company's ethical even before you get to the interview stage? And I think it's just looking at the products that they offer and just using common sense and logic as to foreseeing like what data do they collect and how you think they're using that data. Obviously, it's not very clear cut, right? Like you just described. But being fearful of working for companies because they had a negative media story is also difficult, because the media will focus on a tiny little, sometimes negative thing and blow it up into something big. Other times they'll just highlight something that's truly negative. So I think using your own comfort zone as to what you're comfortable working with, and that moral compass that we all have following that.
Yeah, and anyone who makes some blanket, one thing I really dislike is when there are blanket statements like, how could you work for such a company? Like, okay, if your company is like explicitly involved in like very illegal things, then I get it. But like the vast majority of companies are trying to like figure out how to run a business.
Yeah.
And as you're trying to run a business, like you make mistakes, you do good things in response. I would also look, when you're thinking about ethical companies, how have they responded to mistakes that they've made? Like, like if they have a very negative public thing happen, the response to that and the potential changes that they make as a result are often, they should tell you a lot about leadership at that company. And if the leadership is focused on driving toward ethical outcomes, then very often the rest of the company follows suit. It is very often a reflection of leadership.
Yeah, we have a comment here from Rob that organizations that are ethical with their data will accept results, even if they challenge preconceived notions. They'll accept findings and not look to manipulate them or make decisions that data do not support.
Yeah, this is part of being like, when companies say they focus on data and they make decisions based on data, that means they also make decisions that they don't necessarily love based on data. Right? If it's very easy to accept the positive recommendations, like, oh, this is great, this is a beautiful initiative, the things you've been doing and assuming for the last 5 years are exactly right. But if you put that around and you say, hey, this thing you've been doing for 4 years has probably been like a net negative on your revenue and the executives love it.
Yeah.
Then you find out like how data really plays out in a company, like making those hard decisions. A good example would be at like, certainly at larger tech companies, I've heard anecdotal stories about it at LinkedIn and Facebook and places like that, but where like they really won't consider something to be shipped unless there is specific evidence for its impact on users. Like it doesn't matter who proposes it. And I think that is a powerful statement, because usually like we talk about being data driven, and I'm sure we're all been a part of companies or in companies now where if the CEO decides that it's going to happen, it's going to happen. Like regardless of whether the data supports that. I'm interested. I really love hearing about stories in companies where the CEO or executives are held to the same kind of standard of like, okay, your idea doesn't get to go unless we have evidence for it. I think that's a really interesting test case for like how much you really like data.
Yes, absolutely. Or the reaction you get when you put data in front of people, or the results of some analysis that doesn't agree with their gut reaction, like you said, what they've been doing or thinking for 5 years. If you get the comment of, can you go and rerun the numbers, then you're probably in the wrong place.
Yeah, like, can you fix the statistics you did on that? Like,
bar chart's wrong, by the way.
We've definitely all been there where they're like, is there a technique that will tell me something different?
Are you
Like,
sure this is accurate? I mean, it just doesn't match what I had in my mind. So, but even with my survey, that data visualization survey that I was talking about earlier, the survey results really didn't 100% match what I was expecting. But that doesn't mean I'm going to change them, right? Like
yes,
you're just going to go with what the data that you collected tells you. Obviously, you can look into it and make sure that there are no outliers or just like cleaning the data properly, but don't clean it to the point where you're meeting the expectations that you were told to meet, right? So,
exactly.
yeah, be careful about that as well. Question here from Claire. So she's new to the space. Can you comment on where to find data sets for projects, not Kaggle? Hashtag not Kaggle.
I think that's an interesting, let's see. It's really interesting to think about where you can find that.
Where can you not find data? I mean, I think when I was looking, the data literally is everywhere at this point. You can even have your own data, right? I pulled my own YouTube data. You can pull your own LinkedIn data if you wanted to start with something you truly care about. You've got data about yourself. I mean, I run, I've got data around my running. So I visualize all of that data as well because it's fun and it's close to me. But if you're looking for data sets for projects, I mean, you can use personal data, but where would you go, Eric? Not Kaggle.
I actually think the Google dataset aggregation that they like, I'd have to find the links. I know I've mentioned it more.
You just Google the word Google dataset and you'll find it.
Yeah, like because what I like about the data sets that I've seen come from there is they're not always as curated or cleaned as what you would find on Kaggle or other platforms. And I think it's important that when you look for data, it doesn't have to be about a specific topic or a specific, like, it almost doesn't matter. If you're working on things like data cleaning and data transformation, it's more important that you find variety rather than a specific domain. Like if you find like real estate data and healthcare data are universally like the worst and messiest type of data because they're often very free form entry where people are typing things in. Healthcare data is very protected, so it's less easy to find. But real estate data is a good place to start. If you can do stuff with real estate data, and that includes location, that includes names, it includes like all like prices, all of that type of stuff. It's actually a very good place to start thinking about like just playing around with data. Like, can you deal with real world messy data? And that's something that, like, whatever it is, if you download a data set and you see that it's like perfectly clean,
yeah,
you can do things with it, but understand that it's probably already gone through like tons of transformation.
Yeah, exactly. And we have a lot of suggestions here from other folks. Got data.gov. I think this is a dataset research.google. Got another same one, the UCI repository. A lot of suggestions. Thanks, guys, for jumping in here. I think one thing with when you're downloading these data sets and they're not clean and you're not working, let's say, with an instructor or a mentor, and you're just getting started and you're cleaning this data, how can people know if what they did was right? They don't have that checkpoint. Like, okay, I cleaned the data, but how do I know I cleaned it the right way? So what are your suggestions on addressing something like that?
So whether knowing you cleaned it the right way, so there are two options. One is that you have to have some domain knowledge about what it is, right? About what space you're working in. And so I'm not going to assume that you necessarily do. That's, I think, if you know real estate data or you know healthcare data or whatever it may be,
she's looking for healthcare data. She just specified. So
all right. So healthcare data. So one, having done some work in healthcare, like it's super tricky because the next thing I was going to say is if you find a data set that is messy, there's often people who have gone through and done meaningful transformations with it. And it can be good to be able to compare what you do and the approaches that you take with what they've done. So something that's challenging here is finding data sets that other people have worked on and done things with, and then being able to compare like the results that you had with what they did.
And have it not be the IRS data set or the Titanic.
It definitely does not. I mean, they're fine. They're great data sets, but like, I think if I see another analysis on Iris, I feel like I've seen like there's probably like billions of permutations of potential analyses you can do on Iris, and I've seen like 45% of them now. So like we're getting near this like threshold.
That's good. All right, thanks for that. We got a question from Lucas for you, Eric. So could you speak to how you're applying data science to a major project at work and how the outcome of that project will impact business performance?
So I can't talk about like specific projects, but I will tell you at a high level. So I do a lot of experimentation work. So that's what I've done for the last few years. And experiments generally mean that their most common use case is you're deciding whether to ship a feature change into an app, right? So if you're on, like, let's take an example on LinkedIn. They released the ability to like record your voice. Or sorry, say your name. Like I think if you're Ben Taylor and you have a really tough name to pronounce, you can go and say it specifically. But
it's not how I thought you pronounce it, by the way, guys. Check out Ben Taylor. What is he? Data Robot now, right? He's the one from Data Robot.
Yes.
Check out how you're supposed to pronounce that name because it's not what you'd expect. Definitely not how I pronounced it. So highly recommend. Don't go right now. We're gonna wrap up in a few minutes, but. Yeah, go after the session and check it out.
But a feature like that. So if you think about the decision to release it, right? What are the things that you need to decide? You want to know that if you release a feature like that, that it's not going to detract from other key metrics for your platform, right? If you want, let's say that for some reason that became really prominent and it kept people from reading more people's headlines or scrolling further down in their profile or something like that. There are all these unintended consequences of shipping features that you would not even believe that they're true. But this is why we do experimental design. Is like, if we add this, it has potential impact and negative consequences over here. So this is something to, I just read, like, I need to not read comments when I'm talking.
Did you read this comment?
Yes. So if you think about that, the decision to release a feature is actually a very like scientific decision. When we roll this out, how will it affect traffic? Because it's often not just about will people use this feature. It's like, if people use this feature, how does it affect their use of other things on the platform? Right? This is a really common data science question. And this is where applied stats, experimental design, everything like this really comes into play. And that's what I do at Yelp. So I lead our experimentation group, and we do this like, like most tech companies who are they're running hundreds or thousands of experiments at a time to figure out if the changes that they want to propose are going to be positive or negative or neutral. So this is something that is really common, particularly as companies start to scale, is they have to decide, like, should I do this or should I not? And you're trying to optimize specifically on user behavior. So that would be one good example. It has massive impact. It affects revenue, a lot of revenue. And so it's very high leverage when it comes to decision making.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I know it's tough when you work for a company and you're trying not to give out information, but then you're asked the question. So I'll just take one last question here from the audience. We've got Beza asking, what do you recommend for people who are transitioning over from different fields to data? Even if you have done good projects, employers ask for previous job experience. Do you have advice to overcome this challenge? I know you touched on this a little bit, Eric, but maybe just do a quick summary. What can people do if they're transitioning from, let's take an example, if they were in finance and they're going into data?
So I think it's important to think, how do you position your previous experience as well? Like, don't discount the experience you've had, because the experience you've had often shows that you understand how to function within a business, that you know how to make decisions, you know how to create impact. So like, understand that that experience is really valuable. The experience that you may need to focus more on is, how do you get specific examples of data work, right? And that involves finding the right data sets, involve finding reasonably sized projects. Like, don't bite off this gigantic project that will take months. Do something that is reasonably focused. And it's more than anything about trying to share that. right? So when you apply to positions, make clear that you have business experience, right? That part I think is really important.
Yes, I was just going to bring that up. The fact that you have that domain knowledge can actually help you stand apart from the other aspiring data scientists out there.
So don't discount that. That's my number one advice, is make clear that you are a professional. You're looking to move more into the data space, but like that business professional mindset and the way of operating within a business often resonates a lot with people.
Do you want to take one more? Scott Taylor's here, the data whisperer.
All right, he's here. All right.
He's here. He's just asking about metadata and how do they value, how does Yelp value its master reference metadata?
I can definitely not say it.
I know you're new to the roles.
Well, also like there's like limits to what I can like. We share a lot of data publicly. First of all, like Yelp has been like we release a lot of data publicly. People can get it through APIs. They can get it wherever they need to. But when we talk about specifically around this data itself, sorry, did you take the question down? I was trying to read it. There, thank you. Thank you. Mm-hmm. So I'm trying to think. I probably have to be less I can't disclose a ton of things about it. But when we think about viewing our data, right? We do it like most tech companies would, right? We have data that's tied to the user,
mm-hmm.
right? Like what makes a user, right? How do we like think about using accounts so that if we know who one person is, right? They could have 8 accounts, but we know who one person is. How do we do the same thing for businesses, right? Businesses could potentially have multiple profiles. How do we know that? How do we make sure that we don't allow one business to have like 6 different sites and reviews on Yelp, like different locations on Yelp? There's a lot of processes that go behind this to try to make sure we have like master records for businesses, for users, and that we tie these things together in creative ways. It's something that, and conceptually, how important is it?
I was going to say, Eric, the question's a lot simpler. Just say, is it important or not? Just yes or no. How important? Very important or not important?
Like
very important. Okay, there you go.
Very important.
Eric is just saying thank you. He has a love affair with data and trying to break into the field. Thank you. Thank you for joining, Eric. I think that's going to be it for the audience questions. So any final words, Eric, before we wrap this up?
I feel like this could be an infinitely long conversation about data careers, but we'll hopefully continue to iterate on this. And so if you have feedback or follow-up or suggestions, like include them in comments here so that as we think about future iterations of this, like we can dive and maybe hone in on specific topics. We can bring in other people, like when we go find Andreas after this and be like, hey, data engineering, like
he does his own LinkedIn Lives, but yeah, I'm sure he wouldn't mind to jump into a session.
We need to phone a friend right now, right in the middle of it. But no, I think
we need Ben Taylor to show us how to use that, name recording feature. He can hop on and
Ben is the resident expert as far as I'm aware. So
I recorded my name, by the way, my actual name. Anyways, I'm going to end on that. So Thank you guys for joining. Eric, thank you for your time. Another great session. We should do this again.
All right. Sounds good. We'll do. All right. Bye, guys.